Hello and welcome to the Weshtern Philosophy Podcast. Two friends with oceans and oceans discussing the unseen forces in our lives through the lens of music, mystery and crack. Today's guest is men's work facilitator and mentor Niall Graham. I just finished a life-changing 3-month container with him, so it is apt enough that this episode is about the topic of men's work.
What we really did in this container is look at like the bigger aspect of that. What is our relationship with the feminine? What is our relationship with the goddess? Which is very much part of our culture from before. Like we worship the god and the goddess. And what is our relationship to land? And so in that sense, then it is difficult, as you say. It's like I know I need to do some work around this, but I don't really know what it is. And very much for me, I knew when I was setting up the container, you need to be bringing women into men's work. And I don't know what that means, and I don't know the impact, but I know that it needs to happen.
Well, you're doing it now.
Are we on? We're on like Azerbaijan.
We're on like Donkey Kong.
Morning, lads. This is a very uncomfortable position for me. On the podcast today, we have Niall Graham. Actually, I've only just realized, me and Anthony did, we wrote like some free association kind of things for the podcast when we just started out, like spring of this year. And one of them that we always jokingly kept coming back to was Sacred Cockman. And I think...
Oh my God. That's so true. It's in that notebook.
Yeah.
On our first strategy meeting about the podcast, we wrote down a load of free association terms, and one of the things I wrote is Sacred Cockman, and neither of us could remember where it came from.
Sorry, that's not your official title,
We're going to
Niall.
need to post a photo of that because people are going to think we're taking the piss. That is 100% true.
And I mean it in a beautiful way as well. Yep. It sounds a bit silly, but I mean it. No, okay, so Niall Graham, men's work facilitator, coach, Jesus Christ.
Men's work facilitator, coach, and savior, Jesus Christ.
And savior, Jesus Christ. Niall, can you please tell us your titles so we get them right?
I think men's work, I call myself men's work facilitator and mentor. And that kind of covers everything. Facilitator being like I work with groups of men, and mentor being I work individually with people, so that kind of covers everything for me. But Sacred Cockman is good.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, I can see the business cards now.
Well, yeah.
So in this chat, we've been planning this chat for a while because the first time I met Niall was when he was dog sitting Blarney. The lovely dog that is in every episode of the podcast. He's snoring on the couch now, and I saw Blarney in a cafe in Corfin, and I was like, who is this man with Blarney? It's nice, isn't it, when you know the dog and you don't know the person? But it felt very synchronous to me because I was really looking for... I'd been always doing loads of work on myself, but there was a bit where I was like, I don't know where to find this. And I'm so... Oh, Anthony, can you please get the woo gong?
Oh, hold on a second.
Sorry, yeah. I'm. See, this is what happens when you put me in charge. I just start demanding loads of stuff from people. But... okay, here it comes.
How woo are you?
Well, quite woo. Because I sometimes when I can't find a certain answer, you just put it out to the universe. And I kind of said, okay, I think I need some help here with some parts of me that I just don't know how to integrate. I don't even know what these parts are exactly. And there was Niall in the morning dew in Corfin with Blarney. And so I just finished doing your container, The Path of Sacred Kingship, last Monday, where we have a Sweat Lodge weekend, which will be the real end, but we did all the online calls. So, it's been quite an experience.
Do you think you got what you were looking for, what you're putting out to the universe at the time? Yeah?
100%.
What was that?
I'm not actually sure, but it had to do with I was finding sometimes, especially in my relationship, that I was coming up against some kind of holding back in myself. And like I always say, like I'm a whore for therapy. I go to different people and they all kind of would triangulate on the same thing, even if it was very different people, like Josie the Snake, our CST guy, and then Breed O'Donoghue, psychic healer, and they would all like, yeah, that's you. that's not necessarily you've done a lot of work in your relationship. It's actually something in yourself that you're carrying. So there was some part of me that was just very careful towards the feminine, I suppose.
Yes, yeah.
And I asked for help with that, and then Niall came, and I 100%, or well, 100% is always too strong, but I got so much out of it, and more than I could have thought. Geez, I didn't want to make this all about me, but I do think, honestly, it'll be interesting to talk about, because it was such a transformative experience, and I'm very grateful.
And I think, like, I relate to what you're saying around. I feel like there was something that needed to happen, but I'm not exactly sure what it was, and obviously having worked with you in the group for 3 months, just like getting to know your story a little bit as well. And there was a lot of what was coming up for you that I related to in myself, like the difficulty around relationships, parts of me that were scared to show up in relationships, parts of me that also, I think sometimes some words mentioned in the space of like being petrified or terrified.
Yeah. I remember that.
Of the feminine, terrified of the mother and terrified. So this is also really quite complex in terms of like, it's not only about our relationship. And I think that if we can look specifically at relationship, I think that's one aspect, but that like what we really did in this container is look at like the bigger aspect of that, what is our relationship with the feminine? What is our relationship with the goddess, which is very much part of our culture from before, like we worship the god and the goddess, and what is our relationship to land, and so in that sense then it is difficult, as you say. It's like, I know I need to do some work around this, but I don't really know what it is. And very much for me, I knew when I was setting up the container, it's like we need to be bringing men or women into men's work, and I don't know what that means, and I don't know the impact, but I know that it needs to happen. And it was very much a confirmation for me by the end of this container of like, wow, the power of men and women coming together, and men being supported by women and going through this initiation into the feminine, into the land, into the goddess is insane.
Yes.
And I don't even know that we know the consequences of this, not only for ourselves as individual men, but also the impact on the land, the impact on our relationships. And so it's hard for me to like quantify what we just went through, and also it'll take a little bit of time for this to kind of filter through our own psyches. And also, as you said, it's not fully finished yet. But what I like about the weekends that we're going to be doing next weekend is it materializes a lot of what we've done in a very ceremonial setting, in a very ritualistic way. But now we're going to be bringing that out into the world. As we sit here together, there's a different level of us, say, doing this on Zoom or whatever, and then doing the sweat lodge on the land. We will be going to Queen Maeve as well, and she is the representative of the feminine in Ireland. So we're really bringing this work onto the land, into the physicality. So that feels like the final piece of this. So I don't even know, what you're talking about.
I love what you're already speaking to, like, because that, I think actually that sacred element, I kind of want to bring it back a little bit, because we're kind of in deep with the container we've done, but I love what you're speaking to about what it's doing, what the ripples of it will be.
Yeah.
Like, already me and Anthony have felt ripples in our friendship because of it, positive ones, and but what it will do to the land. And a part of it that I think, so, as everyone who listens to this knows, I'm originally Dutch. I don't think I could have done this in the Netherlands. The ground for, like, you could definitely do men's work, and there's a lot of spiritual work going on there. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that bringing in of the sacred elements of Ireland, that really did a lot.
Yeah, and I think also that people are attracted to Ireland for that reason. I think that, when we look at the history, because we can't do any of this work without looking at history. Ireland itself, although colonized, we lost less of our culture in some ways than maybe, say, Central England. That was like taken over by the Romans for 500 extra years, And much as obviously we were colonized, our language was taken, our songs were taken, and the impact on the land. But we also have a lot of sacred sites. And for me, my experience of being in Ireland is that it is a magical place.
Yeah.
And I know that people are attracted here, and I know that we have shamans, we have like medicine people who live in Ireland, So there is something about this country that attracts certain type of people to do certain type of work. And I think the ritual ceremonial aspect is very present here. And as you say, like Central Europe, maybe there's different things that people are concentrating on. So just to really hone in on that as well, the specialness of Ireland and what it holds, and that kind of sacredness is still really present here.
Yeah,
I feel. So I understand what you're saying. There's something about it happening here.
That's kind of why we call it Western philosophy. I mean, you mentioned the Romans, and the idea is that during the Roman Empire, Rome was the heart of civilization, quote unquote, and the further you were from Rome, the more uncivilized, quote unquote, you were. So we were the most barbarian country, and the west of Ireland is the most barbarian part of the most barbarian country. Yeah. So when we started a podcast talking about highfalutin topics, we wanted to kind of honor this kind of place-based, intuitive, maybe slightly non-academic, maybe not what people often think of when they think of like philosophy or ritual practice and so on, that it isn't the language of the colonizer, you know?
Sure.
You know?
Well, it is literally, but...
it is.
In
a literal sense it is, but in practice.
Yeah, like there is a seeping in of, you know, when I lived in the West, I lived in the Hinch Ennistamon for almost 2 years here, and recognizing that we are different in different places, you know, and my relationship with the land here was very different from my relationship with the land, say, in the north or in Donegal. And so I agree with you. It's like when we live in these places, they impact who we are, you know, this idea of the land 100%. Grows the people, you know. And what I experienced here living in Clare was very different from how I am in different areas of Ireland. And so the intelligence of the land starts seeping through us. We start speaking from that. And that is an intelligence way beyond this linear logical thinking that, as you say, came from Rome, you know. And
I'm actually was just talking to a friend of mine who's American and has done meditation retreats and so on all around the world, and she's currently in West Cork at the moment, and she said she can't get over how clearly the land speaks to her there. Yeah, she's like, there really is something. I think it's something about us being on the edge as well. We're right on the west. I mean, there's nothing further west than us until a couple of islands and then the States, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not always... Sorry, Niall, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, like, the two other factors within that, it's like, for instance, if you're walking in a wood, whenever you stick to the path, there's energetic threads that have already been trodden. Once you go off that path, you're in the other world. You're in uncharted territory. And so the energetics of that mean that whatever beings, whatever presence of the trees, whatever presence of the land is more alive. And because the west of Ireland is less civilized than other areas of Europe, there are more places here that are wild. And so there's an intelligence in the wildness that we need because we have also been domesticated as people. Now, what I will say is, like, whenever I lived in Galway for a while, like, the amount of people that died in the west of Ireland is also very present here. Like, if we look at Connemara and the ridges of the potato crops. To hell or to Connacht, you know, so that's also very present here as well. So it's a complex energetics for me. There are places, I feel like Clare itself is quite free and open. And then if you move up to Connemara, it's like, whoa, the heaviness up there is really incredible. So, yeah, but it's very complex. It's very complex.
But even like now, like I was living in Doolin before, just windswept, artsy, yes, my lord. More coffee. Doolin. And then now in the Burren, and I found it tricky in the beginning. Like, I love where I am. It's more grounded, but there was so many spirits about from just
what was your experience of that?
I still can't, this is a bit shameful to say, but I still can't really go out for morning walks because it's just too crowded for me. Just, there's too much stuff.
Residue.
Like in Doolin, I would just go middle of the night, go to the top of the hill, and I kind of feel the wind blowing, and I could see the Aran Islands and the moon, and here in the Doolin, in the Burren, it's just like fairy trees all around, and like fucking lots of spirits and the good people, and I know like we're so far in at this stage that I've no shame anymore about my woo woo.
We're going to need a bigger woo.
Yeah, I need a bit. My woo woo ness is reaching insane levels, but yeah, it's a real big difference. But I love it as well. Like when I was recently in the Netherlands and I was talking to like really good friends of mine, people who are really close to my heart, I was just like, oh, my context is so different now to theirs, because in parts it's the same because we're experiencing time and we're thinking about things and we're similar people in a way, but just living in a place that has the magic.
Well, it's like Niall said, the more built up a place is, the more quote unquote civilized and industrialized and citified it is, the less wildness there is. And when you were talking, Niall, I wrote down a bunch of words. That's what these notebooks are for, by the way, if you want to take notes. But a lot of the time nowadays when people have mental emotional problems, particularly men, they're told to go to counselling, okay? And there's absolutely a place for it, but the counselling is just all about the individual. Right.
Sure.
And in 30 seconds talking, you mentioned the land, the goddess, ritual practice, and the history of colonization, and also the mystery that you didn't know exactly what was going to happen. You had a feeling that when you integrated masculine and feminine in this work, that something important was going to happen. But I often, we can look at the land around us and we can get information from that. If we're feeling a bit lost, if we're feeling a bit unguarded, we can listen to the land to a certain extent. And I find it, I wonder what people in cities do when they're not surrounded by nature, when they're just surrounded by human created objects or human beings themselves. It's almost like they're a feedback loop. But here you've brought in all these other things as well. You've brought in myth, you've brought in the land, you've brought in ritual practice, and you've also brought in, which I think is very important, the mystery, that you're committing to the journey more than the destination. Was that always important to you, Niall, or was that just born of pragmatism? Or
well, I think we are very much programmed as a colonial society. We are programmed to be anthropocentric, which is that humans are the most important species, and that was very much part of religion as well, like Christianity. Like I was brought up in a Christian home, and in our particular situation, I was brought up a Protestant, so for me then these levels of hierarchy were filtered into me from a very young age. So as a Protestant in the south of Ireland, then Protestants were better than Catholics, and Catholics, so there was that level of like hierarchy there. And then when we go back to the Bible, for instance, that man has dominion over the land, and there's a separation from the land, and that men are better, or humans are better than animals, humans are better than plants. And so these are all colonial structures of separation from the greater society of life. And all indigenous cultures, like if we go back to the simplicity of the maps of indigenous cultures, like pan-cultural maps of the 4 directions or the 7 directions. So the 4 directions is like what we experience on this plane of north, south, east, and west. And then in the 7 directions, like the Lakota, and we would have had this in our own indigenous cultures in Ireland, is understanding that there's a energy from above and then there's energy from below as well, so that we celebrated the Shiel na gigs, like the goddess. They're also very much in churches in Ireland, so the older churches then had the celebration of the goddess and the god as well. So part of colonial structure was to separate us from these greater teachings of life, and understanding that actually there is huge amounts of resource in these teachings, in the connection to the land, in the connection to the goddess, in the connection to plants, in the wisdom of the plants, and this is very much part of like the witch burning. These were the medicine women of this land.
Yeah, they were herbalists. They weren't witches. They were herbalists.
They were herbalists, and they had intelligence, and they had understanding of plants. And so that, these are all ways that we were self-sufficient in some ways, that we were autonomous, we were sovereign, because we were connected to the intelligence of the earth. We understood the plants, we understood how to work with animals. And so we start to see now, and this is what I remember having a chat with someone one time, maybe 10, 15 years ago now. And he was very much like in this situation, I need people people all the time, you know, and he was like, I need to be around people. I need to like, if I'm not around people, then I feel lonely. I feel like I don't know what to do or whatever. And I asked him, like, what about the forest? And he said, whenever I'm in the forest, I feel lonely. And I had a real sadness in me at the time in hearing that, because I was like, we've made ourselves so dependent on each other, and we've lost the grandness of what it is to be human, that we can be connected to so much more, you know. And part of this path of sacred kingship was really acknowledging that there is much more to us than we have been programmed as, breaking out of these shackles of like, I'm just a person, you know, who does counseling to deal with my own emotions, you know. And so I think that also recognizing that psychotherapy was only born in the 1950s, you know. So these are all kind of new reductionist colonial strategies of separation. So when we're only dealing with our own psyche, our own emotions, our own feelings, and which is what has been really cultivated, self-care. How are you feeling? We start to see the reductionist and severance from the community aspect of self, the connection to others, the connection to the land, the connection to all this intelligence. I don't believe that psychotherapy is an answer then to this greater separation of what it is to be a human. And the more I've worked with myself, the more I see that the collective energies, the ancestral energies, the goddess energies of the goddess, they're all part of me here now. They're not separate. And so the more that we focus in on this anthropocentric, like, humans are more important, I'm more important, this whole me culture, this is what we're losing here. We're not adults anymore because we've been taught that us as individuals is most important. Our needs are most important. And when we break out of that, we start to see the complexity of who we are, the relationship with who we are, the mycelium of what it is to be human, that we're interconnected to all these things, and that our ancestral trauma is still present in us now until we address it. That the trauma of the land is still here, present now, then we can start to unravel ourselves.
And we have tools.
We have tools. Well, we're starting to have tools now.
But even things like you mentioned, ritual. Ritual is so important. Like, what do we do ritualistically anymore? We've lost the church. What do we do? We ritualistically check our phones. It's not going to heal the land, you know. But there's something to be said for turning up. Sorry,
I love no. Like, but I love what you were. Jesus, so many things I've written down, but I love what you're tying in there, Niall, because I'm thinking, like, so my partner Yvonne is a psychotherapist, but the funny thing is that she but I'm not but I'm actually that sounded like
the beauty of psychotherapy is like that.
No, stop because I'm not offended. I actually think you nailed it, because her thing is like bringing in all this other stuff, all this embodied work and yoga and hypnotherapy and nature. So it's nearly like the entry is psychotherapy. That's the thing above the door. But straight away when you go into embodied work, you're into ancestral trauma. Yeah. You're into what the body remembers. You're into what the land, well, in her case, she does all the other stuff with the land as well. So, sorry, guys, I didn't mean to come across as like I'm going to stand up for it. That was not the thing at all.
Evie's coming for you.
Yeah, she's short, but she's going to kick you in the ball. No, but it's like, I actually think you nailed it, because so quickly for it to work well, like when I've done pure psychotherapy, doesn't do anything really for me. Like it only kind of rearranges the thoughts in my head, and
I feel it can bring stuff up, but I don't personally find.
Whereas for you to be a good therapist, you need to bring in all those other things, which directly then tie into what you're saying about the whole wider experience of being a human. Lads, we've so dived in. My left brain, my rational brain, wants to kind of put a bit of background into this story for our listeners and for myself. Can you? Well, actually, Niall, what I was just thinking, so Graham is your surname,
sure,
but Niall is Niall your original first name, or have you Gaelified your name?
No, Niall was.
So you've kind of a Catholic first name and a Protestant second name.
Yeah, well, I was born in Ireland.
Yeah.
My parents are from here, but
Yeah.
Graham obviously is Scottish, so we came here in the 1600s. We were planted here. Like
Yeah.
that's also part of my lineage that I had to come
Yeah.
to terms with. It's like I am also more part of the perpetrator than the victim in some ways, because I was identifying with this. So like, oh, we've all been colonized, and I'm like, actually, my
Bit of both.
ancestral story is not that, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been here for generations as well, from the 1600s. So,
Yeah.
so my parents just like that name.
Can I ask you something? And this might be a slightly tricky question, but from people of that background, Niall, I often wonder, it seems to me that the relationship with the land is very complex from people from a Protestant Unionist, loyalist background, because I'm not going to speak for everyone, but you can see that in a lot of the public demonstrations of their culture that they are very much looking towards England and Britain as like, I even know some people from that background that refer to Britain as the mainland, you know, and Northern Ireland as being some kind of offshoot kind of thing. So do you think there is healing there that can and should be done with the land? Is that something you can speak to?
Well, this is something that I feel like I'm in the middle of at the moment, and I really like that you're bringing this. And actually, to be honest, on some level, I didn't know that was the case, but it's certainly been my experience. Like, speaking very personally here, and this is one of my key wounds in life, being a Protestant brought up in Ireland, and also being the only Protestant family in a Catholic school. And my father was a Methodist minister. He wasn't at the time, but he became a Methodist minister. So it was very formative in our family. And I remember watching UTV when I was younger, because we lived in Monaghan, just below the border. And I was like, oh, they're my people.
Yeah.
The Protestants are my people. And I need to go to that land, because that's where all my people are.
Sure.
And I think it was perpetuated because we were a very religious family. So there was that separation, you know, there was this unconscious sense of like, Catholics are all going to hell and all those other stories that are like, well, I didn't say that. And you're like, well, you kind of implied it. You know? So I've had those conversations over the years. But so there was a real thing. And I lived in England for 10 years trying to navigate that, of like having this unconscious feeling that I needed to be there, that I didn't belong here, that there was some sort of separation. And to be honest, I don't know the answer to that, but I know that there's a difficulty with myself on the land, and especially when I left Ireland, with the two pieces. I don't feel like I'm Irish. I don't feel like I'm connected to Ireland. Yeah, I don't feel like I'm Irish. I don't feel part of here. I need to go to England to find my people. And B, I don't know what it is to be a man.
And those were connected for you, Niall?
Yeah, I'm being an Irish man, because also very much part of the projection on Irish men is, do you know, this, when I lived in England, it was like, do you want a Guinness? No, I don't want a Guinness. Yeah. Do you want a pint? No, I don't drink. You don't drink?
Yeah.
You're Irish. Do you know, it's like the projection put on Irish men, and this comes back to the penal laws of how Irish men, the barbarian thing that you were talking about, and that was a deliberate strategy to break down the Irish psyche and to justify the colonial, you know, taking over of Ireland. They're barbarians, they're drunkards, they're violent, they're misogynists, and that was all fed into the English psyche. So then me living there, then getting all that put on me. So there was a shame around the identity of being an Irish man. There was a shame around, or not even a shame, but a disconnection from my sense of being an Irish. And I'm still struggling with this to this day. And then the disconnection of what it is to be a man, because when I lived in England, then I saw what I would consider to be healthier men, strong men who are like resourced in themselves, building businesses, like having good relationships. And then what my experience of being a man in Ireland was, didn't know what I was doing, highly traumatized, not emotionally regulated, you know, and so it's very much part of my journey is to not, I wouldn't say fix myself, but become more healed in myself, deal with my identity of being Irish, deal with my identity of being a man, and hopefully support other people to go through those deep questions themselves, you know. So yeah, I know that's a lot of information here.
I love that. Now we had our guest last week was a local former politician, Flann Garvey, who did a lot of north-south cross-border work during the Troubles. But something that's coming up as you're talking to me, and if we're going to go back to plants, I have a lovely photo book there by a guy called Carrera, and it's called On Listening to Trees. And there's an essay by an ecologist that opens it. So the whole book is just photographs of trees, incredibly beautiful photographs of trees. And it opens with an essay by an ecologist. And he's like, right now we have all of these ecological policies that are geared towards native indigenous trees, right? So he's like, if you're in France, you get money for planting indigenous trees, quote unquote. If you're in Scotland, you get money for planting Scottish trees, quote unquote. He was like, a long time ago in human history, not that there is no such thing as an indigenous tree, but it's much more fluid than people realized. Before we had fence posts, it was acacia trees that we would bring with us. So that's how you made a fence. You planted the acacia trees and it created a boundary. If you were making a vineyard, you didn't have to plant the vines for the vines to hang off. You planted acacia trees. And there's all these other examples of, as human beings migrated west through Europe, they brought trees with them. So he said it's not as clear cut as being like, this tree was always here and therefore it is the only one that has the right to be here. It's like human beings have always been in a dialogue with nature. And there has always been movement. And I found that quite beautiful. And even if we go back to the history of the North, something Flann brought up on the last episode was that the father of Irish Republicanism, Wolfe Tone, was a Protestant and a Northman, you know. And Yeats was Anglo-Irish, and we had this concept of the Anglo-Irish as well, where they were, you know, maybe of British descent, but had been in Ireland so long that they had taken on something of the place. That's how I understand it. Other people might. But I find that we had a space there for people that were in a liminal space, you know, that were in... just that they were not quite this, not quite that. They were a blend. And then obviously with the politics of the North, that middle ground has been completely erased, you know, and we only have one side or the other. And that kind of ties back to the first thing you said about bringing femininity into the masculine. Because when we did our first episode of masculinity with my wife, Katie, we definitely wanted a woman on the pod talking. But also one of the things we really wanted to tackle was we don't believe in polarity here. You know, this idea of like the masculine is only masculine and the feminine is only feminine.
I would say that is duality, but as in separation, like the binary thing, this is the problem. You know, when we talk about non-binary, it's not that we're saying these two things don't exist. We're saying that it's not either this or that. So for me, the polarity thing is like we can move between. But it's the separation, the duality, that's the problem that I see.
Well, we just, when I say polarity, I actually agree with you linguistically, but there's, I think there's like a movement about like, if you're a really, my understanding is like, if you're a really girly girl, you need a really manly man. And they call that movement polarity. And you know, that's, I think it's much more nuanced than that, and that we both have a lot to learn from each other.
Absolutely. Well, we both have masculine and feminine, you know, and to be honest, I would agree with that in some ways. It's like for a man who has a lot of masculine energy, like this, I teach a lot about this as well. These are from the teachings of David Data. So if we have a spectrum of masculine here, feminine here, and then most men tend to be a little bit more masculine. Some men tend to have more feminine as well. But so we have the spectrum of both. And so within that, then there's a tendency for men who have more of this masculine energy to be attracted to more of the feminine energy. So it's recognizing that these two energies come through both men and women, but they're also energies that are, you know, speaking back to what we were talking about before, these are energies in the universe. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so there is a natural dance that happens between both. And I think that's the beauty of the difference between men and women, is that as men, then we have a tendency to hold more of this masculine. Yes, we have feminine as well. And for women, we have a tendency to hold more of the feminine. And that's where that attraction exists. And that's where the beauty of relationship, if we can really go back to the naturalness, not this rationale, like colonial thinking, we go back to the nature of the bodies, our sexuality, our attraction, and start to like really tap into what is the naturalness of my attraction here. What is the naturalness in terms of how I want to show up in the world? So that just because we have a male body or a gender of a male, there are still aspects of us that can be very feminine as well. So once we really start to see the full spectrum of what we can be, then we start to see what is true. And what I really realized over the years, I remember when I was like 20 years old, and I was exploring my own sexuality, which I think is really normal. And I was dressed, I had shaved my head, and I was wearing like mascara, and I was wearing like black nail polish. And that was just something that I did for a couple of years. I think it was a way of rebelling against society. And, you know, I was living in Belfast, and I wanted to express that side of me. It was a bit of a fuck you to society as well, of like, don't put your gender stuff on me. And, you know, now I feel very much like a man. It was also a bit of a struggle to kind of get to this point of doing my own healing. But we have this literal society, you know, where all this transgender stuff that's happening in the space as well. It's like it's natural for men and women to explore both sides for a period of time. And there's an author that I read, was very into a number of years ago, called R.J. Stewart. And he said how we understand life, because life is a spiral, the soul life is a spiral. We go towards the masculine, we start to explore these parts, and then we come back towards the feminine, and then we go back towards the masculine. And that's how we naturally integrate. It's the soul's journey of life. So as we're going through our teenage years, there will be times where women will want to be more tomboy. I express that energy. Integrate, embody, and explore that energy, because it's an energy of life. And then she will want to go back to being more feminine. The same for men. You know, I went through that mascara, like
lipstick's still coming.
Well,
I love how you drew the line there.
That.
You were like, the nails and the mascara was fine, but the lipstick.
I just had a visual, and I was like, no, that's not. I didn't do that.
But yeah, sorry.
Just to kind of finish that off. So it's like, we've reduced society so much to being so literal. It's like, I want to explore being more feminine. And they're like, he must be a girl, do you know? And I'm like, it's such a pain to see this happening in the world. And also people then who have had these operations, and then a few years later going like, that wasn't me. I was just going through a phase. And so this is highly complex stuff. Yes. But I love that, you know, as a man, this is what we did in this course, that I have feminine, like that I can fully own that, the sensitivity. And the problem that we have in society is this binary thing. It's like, as a man, I need to be strong. I need to be stoic. I need to shut down my heart. And this is obviously what we've been fed as men. And for women, then we've been fed the other story, you know, but no, we're both. And this is a number one thing. If we can, like, 100%. Out of the course, if you did fucking 3 months of this shit, the one thing is we are both. Yeah. And we have different levels of that as men and women. Some men will be just have more of that kind of masculine energy in them, and less of the feminine part. And for me, I feel like I'm quite strongly connected to the masculine, but I'm highly sensitive.
And it's so, I love what you said there, because it is, well, first of all, I think on this podcast, we love the grey areas and really sifting through. And I do think in society, what annoys me is that binary thing of like, no, it's either this or it's that. And it's literally that. Like, there's a really interesting...
But that's why we have polarization in society.
Exactly.
Like, that's what we've been fed. We look at politics. Everything is binary now. Everything exactly. You either have to be this or that. So this is a problem.
It's a real problem. And there's a brilliant Dutch reincarnation therapist, Maarten Overseer, who actually speaks a lot to what you're saying about, I think, the way you interpret polarity as kind of the natural charge of nature, kind of, where there's a masculine and a feminine energy, and they even the way you've described this, like physically, how women have a positive charge from the heart and a negative charge from the vagina, and vice versa. Yeah. So where men, the power, that positive power comes more from their balls and their genitals, and then the negative pole is the heart, and that actually fits beautifully. But I think the main thing I want to say is I think masculine and feminine are true as energies, and then as a person, how you fall in that and what your relationship is with that can be all sorts, and it's quite relational. You know, like what I've really taken away from this container is like, it's not like, oh, Bart is highly masculine or highly feminine, but it's more like, what is Bart's relationship to the masculine? What's his relationship to the feminine? What needs to be integrated? What maybe needs to be dialed down? And I think that the problem societally I have is when it's very literal. It's like, oh, you feel a bit like this, so you must be that, which none of us work like that. And then when people are like, no, it doesn't exist. That's, I think, the association I sometimes have with non-binary. Like, people feeling, wanting to identify themselves in one way or another at different times of their life, I think, can be a beautiful thing. But it's when it's like, no, these things don't actually exist. And I think that masculine and feminine so exists.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to recognize that masculine and feminine energy are energies within the body. Like, they're not who we are. And our bodies tend to be in alignment with maybe one energy or the other. So part of life is to explore, as you say, what is our relationship to these energies? And it's not about us, it's about however we have been programmed in relation to these parts of us. And so that's a journey in itself, you know, and the part of me is like, I want to heal my relationship with the feminine. I want to heal my relationship with my heart. I want to heal my relationship with love, because I know in my body and my being that that's work that I need to do. And when I consider like my relationship with the masculine, it's like, no, I feel clear, I feel grounded, and I feel if somebody came into this room now that I would stand up, attack, defend, protect.
Yeah.
I'm very much connected to that wildness, that warrior part of me. So that whenever we really consider who we are, whether men or women, it's like, well, what is my relationship to these two natural things that are present in my body? And coming back to what you're saying about the physicality of the body, I think that's the thing. Now, this may be controversial to some people, but for me, in the colonial sense, we have lost our natural connection with the body. But whenever we consider that what you were talking about, like as a man, as a male-bodied person, my positive pole is this penetrative aspect of me. And for a woman, then, her negative pole, her receptive part is the vagina, which is, you know, the womb, the cave, the receiving part. So that's the essence of her sexuality. And the essence of her positive pole is this giving from the heart, love, like the nurturance. That's how, like, a lot of women feel connected to that part. It's like, I want to love, I want to connect, I want to give, you know, in terms of a child as well. How do I nurture this child through the breast, through love, through... And for a man, then, that we're receiving that love from a woman. So we're giving from the sense of providership, stability, presence. And so there's a beauty then within the bodies that we have as well. And I think that what's happening in the non-binary culture in some ways is that it really shows to me a sense of disembodiment. And that whenever we really, you know, part of this course was like, how do we connect to our balls? What does that feel like to fully inhabit the body and to feel that power? What does it feel like to connect to our hearts, to be open to the world, to be able to receive love? You know, that's one of the issues that we came up against was like, for men, it's not about giving love. It's like, am I open to love? What's the fear that comes up in me when I step into the presence of a woman who is fully loving? Yeah. Do you know? And so we really coming back to the body and the embodiment piece. And that's all my teachings around masculinity, men, whatever. It's not about like, these are how you should be. It's like, how do you remove all the blocks so that you find the truth of who you are underneath that? And there are ideas around that because we're natural beings in a body, so that as a masculine being, then it's like, how do we develop more of these aspects of stability, strength, perseverance? And as a feminine, so we have a kind of a map, but who we become as men, also recognizing that there is no destination, is up to ourselves. And we are all an expression of the divine. We are all an expression of the masculine and the feminine. And that's the beauty of this. Because the further I go on, the more masculine I become, the more whole I become, the more sensitive I become, then the more I step into like the potential of what it is to be human. And I think this is really important, that we get the fuck out of this head, you know?
Well, I love what you're saying about the body, Niall, because I think there's a lot of like new age kind of work being done about ascending and being above and going above these things and like, you know, I'm over this, I'm above this, very good. This is not my vibration. Sometimes you need to go right down into the fucking depths of the earth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the other side. That's the goddess, that's the earth, that's the feeling body, that's the feminine, that's the emotions, you know, and part of, as you say, the ascendant teachings is we are not the body, we are not the emotions, higher power, like I teach about this all the time. And that actually we so step into what the potential of it is to be a human when we embody both. Yes, I have emotions, but I'm not my emotions. And I guess you learned this on the course.
No, but this is 100% like that integration. I think this is what Katie beautifully spoke to as well when we did our first podcast on masculinity, is that it is that integration of the two sides. Like, one of the things that I found so hugely powerful working with you, Niall, is the combination of that super grounding earthiness and then huge sensitivity. Like, we're on fucking Zoom calls all the time, which, you know, thanks be for Zoom, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible. But it is always, it does feel like it's a thing. I don't know.
I'd say also harder to hold the space as well.
But you are so good at sitting with someone who might be in fucking South America and going, I'm feeling what you're feeling. So your huge sensitivity makes you very good. And I think you said at the beginning of the container, like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not licensed at that, you know, but actually you're excellent at doing that one-on-one work, because you can so much with your huge sensitivity combined with your groundedness feel into the other person's body so very well.
Yeah, and speaking back to what we were talking about before, it's like I had to learn. Well, first of all, I had to see that my sensitivity as a child and how I would be in an environment, for instance, with my parents, like it was a religious environment. There was so much going on in the atmosphere, you know, so I was shutting down parts of me because I'm like, this field, I don't want to be anything part of, you know, and part of my healing journey was then obviously being able to like inhabit that field again and then see, like, I can experience you now. And if I tune into someone on the other side of the world, I would feel exactly what's going on in their body as well. So then we start to see, as I was talking about before, we inhabit these people within us. Do you know what I mean? And so the more that we can do our healing, then we also start to see the necessity of how we're all interconnected, do you know, and how we impact each other. And like, that was a skill that I just, after years and years and years of yoga, and like, I find it very difficult at the beginning, because, you know, this is speaking to people who are very super sensitive. It is difficult to manage that, but it's also a superpower, do you know? And I really had to come to that point of just being like, no, how do I manage this and not try and avoid it or get away from it? Because that's exactly how I work. I know exactly what's going on in a person's body, in their heart, in their balls. Where's the disconnection? Where's the trauma? What's going on with you? And that becomes the foundation of the work that I do.
And there are so many ways to numb yourself to that. Society gives you thousands of distractions and substances and other places to put your energy to desensitize.
Sorry. And the most practical, it's so funny to me always that the sorry for cutting across you there, brother, but I just really want to get this in, that it's so funny that the podcast that we've done that people have said was the most practically applicable to them was the one we did with Breed O'Donoghue, who spoke about how to deal with being hypersensitive. Great. Because it's such a big thing. It's such a not spoken about skill, but the fact that like, it sounds like we were talking to a psychic. It sounds like so woo, and everyone just went, I've been taking notes. This has been brilliant. Yeah. You know, and I think it's that combination of practicality and higher things, which is
and it's just normalizing all of that it is to be a human. Do you know, like, nobody ever taught me about being able to the words that were put on, and this is why it's important to have these discussions. I know how I work, and I know how to work, and then it was only through working with Thomas Hubel. He wrote a book called Attuned. And he said, when we are speaking to someone, they are in our body. So it's like we're literally receiving it's like we're putting in the disc of the other person, and we can feel them in our being. And that's how we create intimacy with people. We feel the other person in our being, especially in a marriage or a romantic relationship. There's a connection there where we're experiencing, and if something happens to our partner outside, they get into a car crash or something, we're like, what's happened, Yeah. So to normalize that, and actually we've just been numbed and distracted, but it was through that book that I was able to put words in it, and he was able to explain, that this is how we experience each other when we reach these points of healing, that we experience each other on these very, very deep, sensitive and intimate levels. And so the more we talk about it, as you say, and we talk about the sensitive, and I think in Ireland there's a large degree of sensitivity here, and I think it's also a lot to do with trauma, because we've lost this ground, literally. Then it's hard for us to hold all the projections that are in the field, all the tension, all the ancestral trauma. It's all in the field, and that's why there's a density around us, and it's difficult to live here because we're all trying to navigate what's in the field, and everybody experiences. There's nobody here. If there was 100 people here and I talked about this, that everyone would nod and go like, I fucking know.
Yeah, and one thing that you talk about, like sensitivity. I think for a lot of people, at least for me growing up, my definition of being healthy was if I could work a 40 or a 50 or a 60 or a 70 hour week. If I can do that, I'm healthy. And I think that's a very maybe post-colonial, but definitely post-industrial revolution kind of mindset.
Yeah.
You talked about the way you work. Turns out I don't work that way either. Like, I like to rest, do a lot of like inner work and practices, and then when I feel the moment's right, I can work very hard for a very long period of time. Yeah. But then I need to drop it. You tell me to turn up from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, you will get 30% of me. Yeah. But I'm still learning that. I'm still struggling to integrate that because my definition of masculinity and health and productivity is very much tied up with that 40, 50 hour work week. And then you see what happened to Ireland during the Celtic Tiger, because beforehand we were agrarian, we were farmers, right? So we worked with the cycles, and in summer we worked longer hours than winter, And I think because we had so little, my theory is that we invested in each other a lot, in human connection and music and art and so on, because we didn't have the resources to build grand businesses. And then we had independence, then we had the Celtic Tiger, and all of a sudden all of this stuff was dropped on Ireland. Here is 100 billion euros and 300,000 kilograms of cocaine. Have a great decade, and like and then you've lived in England, Niall, like you there's a difference between British wealth and Irish wealth, because British wealth is generational. Even when we had the bubble of the Celtic Tiger, very few of us actually saw this true wealth, but what we did see was enough to disconnect us from our bodies, disconnect us from the land, disconnect us from the ritual practices we might have been engaging with to keep us a little bit grounded and happy. Does that, what do you reckon?
Well, so the problem that I feel with that is that we're then going into the demonization of money, and that's a problem for me. Sure. Because we're saying, and then money came along, and then it like disconnected us from like the natural way of being. Now, this is a problem for me because a large part of my healing at the moment is healing my relationship with money, because recognizing that money also represents safety, represents abundance, represents a sense of fullness. Mm-hmm. So for me, that also speaks to the trauma of what we experienced in colonial times. Yeah. Now, for me, in looking at what you're talking about, 2008, and also my own individual journey around this, it's like I've also have huge amounts of trauma around money, because I was brought up in Ireland. We didn't have much money. Yep. There was always this kind of in the back room, my dad going like, "Don't ask your mother for this," and this mentality of like, don't ask, and if I'm in a cafe or mom was like, "Oh, what would you like?" And you could see the stern father, do you know what I mean? Sure. So the trauma of money then is very much in my system. So then as I got older, big amounts of money came in, big amounts of money went out.
Yeah, yeah.
So we don't have the nervous system capacity to be able to hold abundance. We don't know what it feels like to have safety in the body, to have that sense of resource, that there's always food there, famine, that there's always money there, poor Irish farmer child.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we build up the capacity and the health within the nervous system to be able to hold money as being the energy of health.
Yeah.
Of being the energy of stability, groundedness, abundance, resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Because the resourcefulness in Ireland was they took all our fucking food.
Yeah.
They took all our fucking forests.
Yeah.
So then you have a nation then injected with X amount of money that doesn't have the nervous system capacity and also the belief system to know how to deal with that money in a healthy way. And then it goes right up your nose.
Yeah, 100%. And then it's gone.
Yeah.
But
so what happens with that is the nation, the nervous system capacity of a nation that hasn't learned healthy integration of money and abundance blows it out the fucking window to get back to what we're used to.
Yeah.
And that's the same with romantic relationships. We attract to partners so that our nervous system is used to that. So you give people a load of money, the nervous system, the collective nervous system is going to blow all that money to get back to what it's used to, which is poverty. No money,
And it's so interesting because it is a natural thing. Like money is not unnatural. In Chinese medicine, the 5 elements, the earth element is the soil you are planted in. It's your ability to nourish from your environment.
Yes.
In the 4 Hellenistic elements, fire, air, and wands. I'm thinking in terms of tarot. So swords, wands, and cups are all internal, and then pentangles are external.
Oh yeah.
So it's the aspect, great. So pentangles are resources in your home, like your house, the place you live. Like that's absolutely part of health and happiness, And I love that you brought it there. And I think we should also acknowledge that we're quite lucky to live in these times where we can explore our sensitivity, because very few of us are dying of TB or starvation or so on, like we might have been back in the day. So,
but maybe starving. Or have been starving spiritually, and maybe that's now...
Well, that's what's starting to heal now. That's what I see starting to heal, and from my own journey, it's like when I first came back to Ireland, 2015, and what happened to me was I was living in Bristol, and I had just discovered like nature work, and I was on the land, connected to the land, and I was like, fuck me, I've just literally abandoned my home country and trying to connect it to some other land. And there was a realization in me that I was like, fuck, I need to go home. I need to face all this shite that I ran away from, my identity of Irish, the Irish land, being a man and all that sort of stuff. And so I went back to that. I've completely lost track now. What were we talking about?
We're talking about money.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we've talked about this so often, Anthony and I, about that there is a real scarcity mindset in Ireland. But I think you nailed it there. It's just emotional home. It's why people build houses that are, torn apart by hurricanes, and then next year they build in the same place, and you're like, there's another fucking hurricane coming, but it's home then, literally. And I've noticed it so often, like especially with music gigs, like me negotiating for the money for music gigs, we always get more than what local musicians are used to, but then people will actually complain that I've given them more money. They will go, that's too much.
Yeah.
Are we getting that for this? That's not worth it. They're uncomfortable with it.
Well, it's a trauma. The system is unable to accept more than it believes it's worth.
Exactly.
And that it's been told it's worth.
And I have it myself as well, so I'm not out of that scarcity mindset completely. It was actually one of the things. We'll make a bit more coffee in a bit. Yeah, sorry, I didn't. Anthony will make a bit more coffee.
Well, one thing I will say that goes with that is that I also have, from growing up poor in Ireland as well, this mindset that
Jesus, it was terrible.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't that bad. I have a lot of fond memories, but this idea that if I get more, it means somebody else gets less.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it.
Oh, there's so much to that. And coming back to what I was talking about before, it's like when I returned to Ireland, then first of all, I had to face my past. So that requires looking at my own childhood. It requires looking at how I was brought up, and then I went through loads of difficulties with my parents, loads of difficulties with my father, and you did this to me, and religious family, and blah, blah, blah. And so at a certain point then, it's like when we start to like face all these traumas and the difficulty. And I was in that for a number of years and looking at the colonialism, and I was holding like grief rituals, and I was giving space for people to like really feel this grief and the sadness of all that we went through as Irish people and individuals. But at some point I was like, I can just do this forever and ever and ever. Yeah. And actually what the healing here is to build resource, to build capacity, to heal the nervous system so that I can have money again.
Yeah.
So that I can deal with my own emotions again, that I can deal with other people's emotions again. And that's the healing that I see is trying to happen now, is that as Irish people, we need to start building resource again. We need to start building our connection to the ground again so that we are able to heal ourselves. Because what I see a lot of people still struggling with this, of like, I'm struggling emotionally, I'm struggling with all the pain of the past, I'm blaming men for this, I'm blaming the British for this, and we're just in this perpetual like blaming victim mentality, and we need to grow out of that now.
100%. And no, 100%, you nailed it. But it's such important work. I kind of feel like I want to, because we've been talking about all these huge concepts, but I kind of in a way want to bring it back to what you're offering men right now. I think one of the first things you said to me, which really rang true, is like, if you've a wounded man, it's either going to be an Andrew Tate kind of hyper masculine, kind of dark, rejection of the feminine nearly, or it's going to be this, and what you see in Ireland a lot, I think, very careful, friendly, kind of ungrounded man, and you're kind of advocating a middle path there.
Yeah. Well, just to come back to the Andrew Tate thing, like Andrew Tate is born out of a reaction to the feminist movement that was
punishing men.
That was shaming men.
Yeah.
And so then men were receiving all it, like we talked about before, this collective energy. And I certainly experienced this myself. It's like, men are bad. You don't have any worth, you're toxic, blah, blah, blah. So whenever men receive all this, they're like, well, who am I? Who supports me? Who sees me? And then you have this guy over here who was representing an extreme aspect of masculine. But that becomes a savior, because for then the disenchanted males, then they're like, oh, there's hope for me here. There's a guy here who's successful, he looks good, he gets women, So yes, it's very immature, but also it's very understandable why it happened, because men and masculinity were so, told that we're toxic, and I still deal with that. And so there's a whole difficulty with dealing with men and women and how we need to navigate that particular relationship as well. So that's just kind of another subject. In terms of the practicality around like for men, I think coming back to what we were saying before, it's like recognizing for men, especially in Ireland, is our first job is to own our power, and to recognize that if we are connecting to our heart, but we're not also connecting to our power, then we're not going to feel whole. We're going to actually end up resenting people. And I went on this journey of being told that I should connect to my heart first. That was the essence of me. And actually realizing that I needed to own my power. Otherwise, I was just resenting people around me. And I wasn't connected to my power. I may have been connected to my heart and connected to people. So recognizing that men need to connect to our power. And also the other side of that is if we're just connecting to our power, and I know that I went through this period myself when I was connecting to my balls, I was connecting to like my sense of masculinity, and then there's a balchiness to that. There's an immaturity of that, and this is how men then go through their teenagers or their 20s, like trying to shag loads of women and trying to like earn loads of money, and this very, very immature masculine. And the way that we come into maturity is by connecting to our hearts, is by connecting to that sensitive, that we could call the feminine part of us. And this becomes the way that we mature then in ourselves, that we're able to hold our power and also hold our capacity to love, hold our ability to be on our track and start living our purpose into the world, and also to be able to connect very, very intimately. hold our sense of being able to be a provider of building, of creating our lives, and also that we can care for and hold compassion and intimacy with our families and our friends and our children. And that's what it is to be a man. And that's the one thing that I feel like coming out of this conversation maybe is like, own all of who you are as a man. And for women as well. Own all you are as a woman. And the joy of being a man for me is like, the more I step into my masculine frame, it doesn't compromise anything. I don't lose any sensitivity. I don't lose the capacity to connect. So there's no compromise here. We can be all of who we are as men. Fully ruthless, like killer, warrior, and deeply sensitive, deeply caring, deeply loving.
Yeah.
And that's what it is to be a whole man. And stop fucking choosing, because this is what society is trying to teach us. You either need to be a macho man, alpha male, or sensitive, got no balls, heart. We're both. Once we start developing both of those, that's when we start feeling fucking peace in ourselves. And we can start showing up in the world, not being apologetic, you know? Because I'm not here like to alpha male anyway. I don't need to compete with anyone because I know my own power and I have the capacity to be able to connect, do you know? And yeah, and that's when I think that's just when we start to accept who we are as men and the beauty of what it is to be a man. So yeah, I don't know if that's kind of answers your question.
I think that was fabulous. I'm just kind of aware of that. I think this is, for me and Anthony, this has been such a big topic as well, like what the masculine is. I think we could talk to you for 17 hours on this because
Deal with your sexual shame. Deal with your sexual shame, number one. If anybody wants to know what's the first step to like dealing with yourself, deal with your sexual shame. If we're not connected to our power, and like especially in Ireland, sexual shame was like really injected in us through the church, through your families, you know, like, and that's the first thing that I go to with all the guys that I work with. It's like, what's your relationship with your cock? What's your relationship to sexuality? What's your relationship with your body? 100%. Because that separation from our sexuality and our cock, we can never be settled in ourselves if we're not in right relationship with our cocks. And you see men who have sexual shame in the body, and there's like an unsettledness, and there's an apology, there's a good little boy thing, there's the nice boy, do you know? And so when we really come into owning our sexuality, owning our power, then we don't need to prove ourselves anymore.
No, 100%. I was just laughing because I put out my hand and I was like, oh, this is what we do in the Zoom calls. You've been ingrained it in me that if I feel something too, I'll put up my hand. But it was 100% true for me. Like, you know, that.
What was your experience of like, because we
but that's what I want to get to actually.
Yeah, great. Go for it.
No, actually, Anthony, I think what you said before we started recording would actually be, I definitely want to give my experience, but I would like to speak to Anthony. And I are very good friends, love him dearly, and he was witness to me going into the container and now coming out of it. Yeah,
so the structure of the container, 3 months, and the first month was facilitated by yourself, Niall, and the second month facilitated by Michaela,
Rooted Feminine Wellness, amazing pelvic care woman.
She's amazing. Woman, she will be on as well.
Yeah, and then the third month, from what I understand, is integration and So, I noticed changes in Bart. Basically, is the easiest way I could say this. About 6 weeks into it, I think I noticed changes before, but about 6 weeks into it, they kind of really came to a head. And this doesn't imply that there was anything that needed to be fixed or anything, because myself and Bart are really great mates and we create things together, and that relationship was always very strong, and Bart's a great man. But
thank you.
Stuff was coming up. Don't thank me yet. I think what was actually happening, because I'm on a bit of my own journey now, which is a bit more of a solo trip, but getting more in touch with basically what I'm feeling and my own reactions to things and so on. And when we're doing this, when we're talking about something every week, and we try to keep it light, but honestly, this pod means a lot to us, and we tend to we want it to be meaty, you know, we want to actually talk about stuff. Not saying we have the answers, but we want to engage with it. Yeah, meat and cocks. It can be the new tagline. But
the sacred cockman delivers. Right?
Meet the meat and cocks. But stuff was really coming up where I was like, I'm not sure. We're getting into really powerful things here, really tricky issues and stuff. And I was like, Bart, I want to make sure that we can hold this when we get into it. Mm-hmm. And basically, there was some stuff about how Bart was presenting some things where I was like, I want to know where that's coming from.
Great.
And I sat down, I was like, Bart, can we have a meeting? Which is always a horrible thing to do to anyone, you know, to sit down.
Oh, yeah, I was nervous.
I was nervous too, to be honest. Yeah. And we actually pushed it forward a day. You asked, can we just meet earlier and get
because otherwise I'm just going to be dreading it.
And I was like,
day.
And you know what, so was I. Yeah. So it was really interesting you did that. I was delighted. Anyway, we sat down and I was like, Bart, I want to ask you about this and this and this. And it was slightly challenging, you know, and you were so good. You were like, I completely hear you. This is where it's coming from. And you explained yourself and you were able to go, it's because of this, and then I this, and then I this. Great. And I was like, this is awesome. And then the really beautiful thing was Bart was able to then turn to me and go, and now I want to tell you what you're doing.
Yeah.
And he pointed out that the way I was carrying some things and carrying myself could make people walk on kind of eggshells around me a little bit. Mm. And he's like, it would be actually easier if you expressed and you wore your anger more openly rather than keep. And I was like, thank you. So, like, first of all, he was able to hold what I was coming to him with. Secondly, he was then able, and I think it's one of the most wonderful gifts your male friends can give you is holding you accountable in a really empathetic way.
Yes.
And I'm so glad you did that as well, that there was able to be this give and take. And afterwards, first of all, I was fucking exhausted after that chat.
Yeah.
But it was really transformative. And that's one example, but just overall, I noticed that Bart had more capacity for difficult conversations, was more sure of himself, was able to express more powerfully and more directly, but also with more compassion.
Yes.
And I mean, like, if you had not told me you were doing any kind of work, I would have still seen the results. It was very measurable and very powerful, and I really wanted to share that with you, and I'm glad you've asked me to share it on the pod, because I think it's extraordinary testament to the power of this work.
I feel it in my body when you're saying it, so it is very meaningful. And I would say the difference that the work with Niall made is, I think if you'd come to me before that with, hey, I need to hold you accountable for a few things, or anyway ask about them, I probably would have taken that, because it's always been instilled in me that you need to be able to take feedback on, but it would have been in a slightly subservient way, maybe. Like, oh, fuck, did I do some... Oh, okay. Sorry, fucking sorry. Like, when some of my Dutch friends came to Ireland the first time, they said, oh, I know why you love this country. They say sorry even more than you do. You know, so... But then the part where I was like, also, Anthony, here's some stuff for you. I wouldn't have had the capacity for that before, because I would have been too frightened of your response. But I felt from that cock place and from that lower body place so much more holding.
Yes.
And
this is the thing, and this is the beauty. Like, so with coming back to this word of capacity, so we and resource, what I was talking about before. So we gain enough resource in ourselves that even that, like, the little boy part of us, which is mostly what a lot of us are acting from.
Yep.
Even if he's scared, even if he doesn't want to say these things or whatever, we have a greater resource around us to be able to say, okay, I understand you're scared, but I also know from this bigger perspective that, you know, to address this. And so this is an absolute joy for me to hear, because it's all very well us doing this deep work, but it's the consequence of the work that I'm interested in. Hearing these stories that you are navigating your relationship better, deeper, and, you know, and this is the point when we have these difficult conversations, it spirals us into deeper connection, deeper clarity in what we're creating. Yeah. Mm-hmm. These are the stories that I'm interested in. And I know for this work in my life, the conversations that I can have now, the capacity to hold, to not be so led by, oh, I don't want to have this conversation, or apologizing, or sorry, or, you know, good little boy, or people pleaser. It's like, yes, I'm aware of that part of me, but I'm acting from something deeper here, deeper confidence.
And it's so, I can feel it like chills down my spine now. It's so big. It's so big because what you've facilitated, Niall, like, obviously there's not just me in this fucking container. So you've done that for 15 people, say.
Well, more, but 18.
Yeah, it's a fucking, so it's such a masculine thing to do now. I'm only messing. But but like, apart from the fact...
I got a big cock,
Apart...
18.
Of course, 18. You don't fucking miss it now. Anyway, what I was going to say, apart from just what it did for me, there's more men you do this for, lots more men outside of this container. But then it changes my family dynamic. It changes my friendship with Anthony. We've had some amazing fucking podcasts recently where people have rang me and gone, that was so healing for me to hear. And like credit goes to everyone in a way. We're all showing up, but your work, it's like such a deep ripple.
Yes.
Because it is then flowing into, like my sister was saying, she was deeply moved by something we did that we probably couldn't have done if I didn't feel more capacity, which also created more capacity for Anthony, because you were like, I think actually he can hear this, so I can give him a bit of feedback. I could give you some feedback. Our relationship deepens, and like I recently, some friend who remained nameless was showing me kind of the opposite. What happens when there isn't that ground? So a friend was disappointing a friend, and they were like, I'm not gonna, I won't say anything. Whereas I'm like, no, you need to say something, because either then that friend is going to show you that they're not able to deliver on what you want for the friendship, but at least you are respecting yourself in saying, okay, but I can't deal with that actually.
Yeah.
Or the friend goes, fuck, thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
We are now deepening our relationship. But by avoiding it, nothing fucking happens. You're disrespecting yourself and you're not deepening the relationship.
100%.
And what I've also noticed, this is a thing I've really noticed in the last while, and that isn't just to do with container, but like the level of my interactions is so high at the moment. The people I deal with on a day-to-day basis are so fucking awesome. I have so few like little petty squabbles that I'm noticing like everything is opening up.
Yes, amazing.
So thank you, Niall, is the main thing I want to say. But also, I don't know if...
Go on. I just want to say this is the beauty of men's work.
Yeah.
And as you say, the rippling out effect. And for men to be able to do their work and to sit with other men and to work so hard. Like, and I saw so many guys, 18 guys in that space.
And not a lad less.
Do this work, And that's why I really want to start, like, speaking to this as well. It's like, there's a load of this narrative around men not doing the work. And what I will, and I'm sure you know this yourself, seeing 18 guys showing up week on week on week on week and doing some of the most difficult work I think we have ever done, definitely the most difficult work that I've ever done, and then the ripple effect from that. So men, given the opportunity and the support of other brothers to work on themselves, men are doing the fucking work. And the rippling effect of that, and because men have been, like, and listen, I know that women have also been impacted in their own ways as well, and women are doing a lot of healing. But men doing the work impacts their families' lives, impacts their homes, impacts their children's lives, impacts their... And this is why I do this work, because it's not fucking easy work. But I do this work because of the impact on the world, because a man who is not in his own frame and in his own health, then the consequences of that are vast.
Yes.
The violence, the abuse, the shutdown, the fear.
Yeah.
And so you take that force and you support it to become healthy. That same force can have exactly what you're talking about, the ripple impact of that. And, women doing their healing and being able to support a man. But this is why I do this work, because the power of the male force in a toxic, I hate using this word now because it's so overused, but using that force in a negative way, and how if we can shift that around through this work, through accountability, through men's work, through dealing with our shame, through dealing with our power stuff, and how that same force then can be a force for good, creation, beauty, stability, safety, and love in the world. And that's why I do this work.
I love that. I'm going to maybe one more point, because I'd love to hear your take on this, Niall. So I'm not saying this is how things are. I'm putting this forward as just an idea, okay? But I was reading a book lately, and he was talking about how we are exiting this age of the masculine, and there will be a slight movement where men were kind of had a little bit more control within the world, and now it's moving to a place where women will have a little bit more control in the world. And he was saying the same way that men, when they were kind of a bit more front and center, were supported by the nourishing, loving aspects of women. Now that when women are stepping into their power, they will actually also need to be supported by the more warrior-like aspects of men.
Yes.
So I think that's
and I think women are calling for that. I think there's a bit of a jostle at the moment for power, because women have looked for equality, and I think within that then there's also an importance for women not to step into competing with men directly. This whole thing of like boss babe or women. Like I'm really big supporter of women wanting to be successful, but not as a way of competing against men or whatever. Like, find your own success, find what works for you, like you're talking about earlier on. Find a way that works. So it's like we're also, because what I see in some of the feminist narratives, that women should be as good as men, but men and women are different. Just finding women's way of working and men's way of working, and then men can step into that protective role, and women can step into more of that nurturing role, that connection to body, so that we're really starting to work together in equality, but not the same. This is the problem, because for a woman to be equal, it's not about her competing against men. It's about her finding her own power. But that's a fucking long journey for both men and women, because the whole point of Path of Sacred Kingship is also to recognize that both men and women have been disconnected from the feminine. It's not only women's work to reconnect to the feminine, it's men's work as well, to understand that respect for our own internal feminine and to the feminine beyond us, so that we can show up for women with love, with care, with protection, with respect, because there's that separation in society of disconnection from the feminine. So I don't know if that answers it. Well,
no, I love that.
Very complex, but like we're really not stepping into like equality between men and women. We're stepping into an equality, but a difference. That's what we're really aiming towards here.
The thing I really want to say, I think what happens sometimes when like a man who expresses himself in a masculine way, like you can, like really grounded into masculinity, even though you are deeply sensitive as well. I think what sometimes happens is that, we all get triggered. We were just talking about this before. Like, our own wounding will mean that certain things will hit us in a certain way, and we're kind of in a triggered response. We're not really, we're half there anymore. And I think what I've seen sometimes with men actually doing beautiful work is that because they're sounding so masculine, women who've been wounded by men who were ungrounded, who were not, or by men who presented in a masculine way but weren't fully embodied, who weren't doing the work, will go, oof, they'll recoil from that, to be wary about it. But you're not, and this is something I really want to like, it's not prescriptive. People always pretend like everything is very prescriptive, like, oh, he's saying so and so. No, you want everyone to be free and live a beautiful life. You're just giving your view on what that is. I think what am I saying? I just think it's such important work. I noticed this when we were talking to Aisling a couple of weeks ago. I just really want people to get on board with the feminine work, with the masculine work, because I think it's going to be the healing
benefits everyone
of our society.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I think it's maybe in closing of this is like, it's like we talked on that final call there. Whenever Tara came on, it's like we're at this wound now, which is the separation of men and women, the separation of masculine and feminine, the separation of sky god and earth goddess. This is the healing that needs to happen, and we can approach it. We are approaching it from all these different levels of, between our interrelationships, in terms of our spirituality, in terms of like how we show up in the world, in terms of our work and nurturing. You know what I mean? So for men, it's like work, earn, build, and then like addicted to cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, whatever, because they're completely screwed inside. That again, that's a separation. How do we inhabit like fully working, as you were saying, be in that creative, oh my God, like power, and deeply care for ourselves, nourish ourselves, eat well, rest well, sleep well. Do you know? That's the separation. That's the separation. That's what needs to be healed. And so the separation between men and women, or the integration of these aspects of self, is the hardest thing we will ever do. Hardest thing we'll ever do as a society and as an individual, but we start with our own selves first, and this group is very much part of that. How do we integrate these two aspects of self to come back to a state of wholeness? And that's where we want to be, because when we're in a state of wholeness, then whenever we have a trigger or a reaction or these younger parts of ourselves, if we're whole, if we have that capacity, like we talked about earlier, we realize that this is just a part of ourselves, but we have the capacity to hold. We're not going into abuse. We're not going into violence. We're not going into projection, rejection. We're like, okay, a part of me is hurt now. When we're acting from this wholeness of all of who we are, and we're seeing that there are parts of us that are still unwhole, and we actively engage every day to integrate and heal those parts of us as well. That's how we become whole adult men.
100%. I just think that overcoming of the separation, it's gorgeous, and it's what needs to happen. And I know we're nearly done. But the apart from just the expanded capacity I feel, and the fact that I can show up more for my family, my wife, my kids, my friends in the world, creating things. Funnily enough, I feel that Hara space that you discussed so much more in creating things, Yes, but anyway, there's so much more we could go into. But just making men aware of the separation, even sitting with 18 men in a group. At least. He's a huge cock, guys. It's at least 18 men. But like. I never had that. I never had 18 sensitive, open-hearted, brave fucking men show up and cry and share their shit. Yeah. And then men not going, he's a bit of a sissy. No, we go, Jesus Christ, you're beautiful and you're a king. You're not, fair play to you for being feminine. No. Fair play to you for showing up, for being both sensitive and strong and brave enough to go to that darkest part of the forest. Yes. And you're helping me by showing your vulnerability. Mind-blowing.
Great.
Niall, thank you for coming.
You're so
Bart,
welcome.
Thank you for, first of all, Niall, thank you for facilitating this work. Bart, thank you for doing it as one of the people in your orbit.
Thank you for supporting me in it, brother. And I hope we will have the sacred cockman on again.
Yeah.
Well, just before we
and plug some stuff, please.
Yeah. So if anybody wants, if obviously we've traversed a lot on this call, but if anybody wants to work with me individually, I do individual mentoring. I do 3-month containers, 6-month containers for something that you want to specifically work on. Some men prefer to work individually. And then I do other containers. I will be doing the Path to Sacred Kingship again this year. I do weekends of shadow work, which is small group of men, 8 guys, as you're talking about, 8 guys coming together, dealing with their shadow. This is very, very deep work. So check me out on Instagram. I'm sure you can put the details below and see what I do next year. But get in touch. If you're fuck, I want some of what they're talking about, get in touch. I'm here. That's why I'm here.
Thank you, Niall.
Thanks so much, Niall.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This has been Weshtern Philosophy. Follow us on the socials at Weshtern Philosophy Pod. If you want to support the podcast, you can join our Patreon to help the show grow, or make a one-off donation via the Ko-fi link in the episode description. We'll be back next week with more chats and another topic. Slán.